This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 224, the March 28th, 2017 edition. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you, joined by the usual crew, plus a little bit later, we're going to have a special guest in the form of Marcus Hersh, not confidential Hersh, but Hersh pre-recorded in an interview that Mike Hogan did this morning. And speaking of Mike Hogan, he is the first member of our usual panel, and he joins us from the DRF offices in New York. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Good to have the team back.
Indeed. All here in flesh and blood instead of on tape. And that other member of the team from Planet Texas is, of course, at UT Big Hair himself, Jonathon Kinchen. JK, what's up?
Arrogate? I'm just kidding. It's good to be back.
You did sort of quite correctly anticipate what the topic of today's show is going to be. I would say 80% of it, possibly more, going to be spent unpacking Arrogate's performance in the Dubai World Cup. And of course, we have to take a look at the question that has been sending Twitter Arrogate's place in the Pantheon, which is, of course, a premature conversation anyway, but we will offer some clues as to the way that we're thinking about it a little bit later in the show. But I want to start off today. Maybe we'll have a little break in the middle where we talk about a little bit of tournament stuff too. But we're going to start off the show by talking about the Dubai World Cup itself. I just want to start with some general takes, and then I have a bunch of specific questions I want to ask you guys and offer my thoughts on. So we'll start with you, Mike Hogan. Tell us about your experience watching this race and what you thought about it in general.
Wow. Well, I think, and I said it when I talked to Marcus, I think everybody in the world expected Arrogate to win. I mean, and he was, I don't even know what the amount of money in the U.S. pools to win on Arrogate was versus everyone else, but he was 1-10, 1-20. He had over 90% of the win pool at some point, which for a 14-horse race with some good grade 1 animals is remarkable. So no one was surprised at all, obviously, that Arrogate won the race. What was surprising to me, and I think to everybody else, was just the manner in which he did it, going from last to first, completely getting clobbered at the break, closing on a track that doesn't really allow for that sort of run normally in a race that Marcus and I talked about it too. It did not break down at all. That early speed held on, and he was the only one moving. It was just an incredible performance no matter how you look at it.
You talked about the betting. He was internationally pretty incredible overlay to my mind, 2-5. Interestingly, even after that horrendous break that you mentioned, where you have that 1 second of, oh my gosh, is he going to be pulled up bad before you sort of saw the hitting that took place anyway. Even at his longest in the in-running market, the betting that happens during the race on Betfair, he only went out as far as 2-1, which surprised me. I would have thought he was considerably longer odds than that. Jonathon, tell us about where you watched the race and what your initial reaction to it was.
Well, I watched it from the Tito's bar in the Hawthorne, downstairs at Hawthorne racetrack. We got there early and had some mimosas for the tournament that they were having at Hawthorne, and we watched it in their Tito's bar, which has 88 TV screens, by the way. It's the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like the front, the back, the whole thing. It's great. So we watched it there, and I watched the break as I was running around the corner because I found out you could bet the race and the tournament. I ran over there and bet some exactas, so I missed the very, very first jump. But then once I got there, I looked up and I saw a track that was lit by artificial lights. It was dark. A horse that I loved, that I was really excited about winning, with pink and bluish greenish silks, was falling back to the back, and it felt like, oh no, they're going to get pulled up. Oh no, they might win. Oh no, they're going to win. And the only difference was Zenyatta didn't get up, and this horse did. And it was one of the most remarkable things I feel like I've seen in racing, where I just felt like everything was stacked against the horse, and he kept coming. My favorite part was the really annoying, super negative, at the track, no way he wins money guy standing behind me like the entire time saying, "Oh, nope, not gonna win. 1-9, not gonna win. Not." And the whole time, as soon as I recognized, like on the backstretch, that he was traveling well, I started trolling that guy with my backwards hand slap and saying, "He's gonna get up. He's gonna get up." And then I called him a winner at the top of the stretch just to piss the guy off even more. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, really cool.
So, a lot of people listen to this show for different reasons. Some people like to hear us argue. Some people like to hear our take on the state of affairs in racing. Others listen for the tips. And occasionally we get something right. We like to say you can't get analysis like this just anywhere. We did have an example of that from Friday's show. Why don't you replay that for us? This is from Jonathon's alter ego, Confidential Kinchen.
Dubai World Cup. Confidential Kinchen selects the fastest horse in the race, Arrogate.
There you have it from Confidential Kinchen. He tabbed that 1-9 shot right on top. JK, did you hear Confidential Kinchen appeared to have been a huge hit? Some people say they liked him more than regular Kinchen. I didn't agree with that, but I was curious if you got much feedback on your performance.
Yeah, I did. I got a couple messages, so that was fun. I'm glad it worked out. It was I had the idea of just throwing something together since I wasn't going to be here, and then I thought I would at least try to make it entertaining, so it worked out.
The joke I made on Friday, I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the show, but I said it's not like he hasn't phoned it in before on the show, but today Jonathon literally phoned it in.
I did hear that. I did.
Oh, you did? You listened. I'm impressed. All right, let's talk. There's so many things to talk about this race and this performance beyond just the silliness. My two hot takes that I texted both to you, JK, and also to Matt Bernier. I really thought it was one of the best rides I'd ever seen. True or false? We'll start with you, Jonathon.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we talked about it last week or a couple weeks ago with what Andy Serling said about the ride on Terra Promesa. The difference between the best and the worst is making sure you don't get horses beat. I'm paraphrasing, but making sure you don't get horses beat. And a lot of jocks would have either A, lagged too far back and not made that run in time. Others would have rushed him up. There's a lot of things that could have gone wrong with that, even though he was by far the best horse. And what obviously we're discussing now is he the greatest horse we've seen? But the idea that Mike timed it perfectly, he did so many things right that prevented the horse from getting beat. And that's what makes it such a brilliant ride to me. I thought it was phenomenal. There's so many ways he could have went wrong, and he just didn't.
The combination of patience and aggressiveness, like sort of at the same time, is what was so impressive to me, I think, not to mention the timing. And it also seems, another joke I sent to you guys in that group text was this Mike Smith's tribute to Zenyatta? And then he said, that thought went through his head at some point as he was in the early stage of that race. Like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to ride like Zenyatta. And it was almost uncanny. Mike Hogan, anything to add about the jockey tactics in this race?
Well, yeah, the first thing I said on Twitter after the race was Mike Smith just takes the hand he's dealt. He takes him last to first in the Dubai World Cup, and you look at what he did in what I think a lot of people think is his other most brilliant race, Arrogate's other most brilliant race, which is the Travers, where he went wire to wire. Smith is able to adjust. I think you guys are absolutely right. He didn't panic. He didn't rush him up. He didn't think, oh, no, I have to worry about kickback. He just said, okay, let's show everybody how great this one is by letting him run like Zenyatta, even though he's never run anything like that in any of his races in the past. It was an amazing ride, and it was an amazing performance. And I think you're right in that saying that some jockeys probably would not have won the race aboard Arrogate the way Mike Smith did.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he was so good in the end. Maybe there was some room for some jockey error, and the horse still would have won. But it just seemed like perfection under the circumstances, and I just thought he deserved particular kudos to that. It really, the stress he must have been feeling, the stress of riding mean, it's kind of funny to think about, but put yourself in a jockey's head. You're riding a 1-9 shot for 10 million purse. I mean, that is like extreme stress. And then you have this crazy thing happen with the miscommunication, apparently, with the gate crew, where there was supposed to be somebody in the gate, and that person wasn't there. And as a result, the horse, expecting that, broke a little flat-footed. And then, now I haven't seen a head-on. I don't know if there is one. But what is your understanding, Jonathan, of the bumping that took place? It looked to me like he got bumped almost to the point where he lost stride. And I mean, no, he did lose stride almost to the point where he got the wind knocked out of him. But what have you seen or heard about the actual contact that took place early in the race?
Actually, I was listening back this morning on the replay from Vic yesterday where Baffert was on, and Baffert said that there was a handler in there. I guess Peter Miller was upset about something like this too. There's a handler in the gate, and then the handler got out of the gate, so he was in there without a human. Yeah. And so he hesitated, and when he did, Baffert said that the other jocks, like they should, like defensive linemen, they looked, they didn't see Arrogate, and they closed the hole. Like he wasn't there, and they closed the hole, and he kind of got pinched back. So that's how I saw it happening as well. And then he just kind of got left. Did he talk about
physical contact, though? I mean, I think
he didn't mention it. I mean, I don't think there was. I mean, I'm sure there was some physical contact. I wouldn't think that it was like a bumped, hard break situation you would see in a running line. I just thought he kind of got shut off. But like I said, I was turning the corner from degenerately betting the exacta that I missed the initial jump, and then I had adrenaline running probably the first 15 times I saw the replay.
So I'm going to jump in here because there is head-on of it. Peter Rotundo, of course, of the Breeders' Cup and Horse Players fame, he tweeted out, and I just retweeted it and tagged you guys. Take 15 seconds and watch it. I'll use the old Happy Days term, the Malachi crunch, because that was what happened to Arrogate out of the gate. And I think you're absolutely right. He because he broke a step slow, the other jocks, they closed the hole, and it wasn't just, oh, he's slow, he's flat-footed. He got slammed.
That's awesome. Peter Rotundo, good Twitter follow at Retro411 if folks want to check that out. All right, so the horses break. Now, it sounds like you haven't, JK, done trip work on this, but I was going to ask, as a trip handicapper, what's your understanding, what's your guess as to what your note would have been, contact aside, at the beginning of this race?
Probably like off pour, 4 lengths, 3 lengths, 4 lengths. Wide every turn, took control top of the stretch, when ready.
Yeah, I mean, there you go.
You know,
OP4 was what I was looking for there. I mean, just so already you're starting from a position of great disadvantage, and you will see instances where being off pour isn't the end of the world in a situation where you have a really hot pace. And looking at just the raw fractions of the race and accounting for the fact that there's no run-up, okay? So people might ask, what does that mean? Well, that means that if the time you see posted on the board is 24 and 48, if that was in the USA, you're probably looking at, 23 and 1 and possibly sub 47. So, like, on the clock, the race was very fast. I did a little bit of research. More accurately, here's my research. Craig Milkowski, can you answer these questions for me? That was as far as my research went. He went ahead and sent his pace lines for both the UAE Derby and the Dubai World Cup. For the Derby, they went 146 to the quarter, 120 to the half, 113 to the finish. So in other words, that's a race shape where they're going very, very fast early relative to a slow final time. Those would probably be coded in red on the Timeform US website. For the World Cup, the figures 145, 131, and 133. So we're not talking about a race that slowed down all that much relative to a fast a very fast opening half. Now, another thing to note about this day both of those races, the Derby and the World Cup, Mike pointed this out already, they held together pretty well, despite those big pace numbers early in the race. You saw, generally speaking, the finishers, the horse with notable exceptions, but generally speaking, it wasn't like those horses who were up front early finished way in the back and the whole picture changed, as Trevor Denman likes to say. You had situations where the front runners were still around at the finish. Now, Jonathan, when you see a race with fast pace figures where the races hold together, what does that make you think, generally speaking, about the speed of the racetrack?
I think it's more of an indication of what's behind them.
Oh, that's interesting. You think they're just bad fields? What I was getting at was, I thought there was possibility the track was very kind to speed. Maybe to me, a horse who's OP4 on a track that's kind to speed even more impressive. But you think it might be due to something else?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, if you think about it, and I watched the replay and listened to the replay again, I love Terry Spargo. And at the end, when he does that thing at the end of the race where he calls every horse that ran, like in what order they finished, Arrogate, Gunrunner, blah, blah. I think it was all like American horses, like the first five. Wasn't it?
Well, if you count Mubtaij, yes.
Right.
So,
Mubtaij,
okay. So,
but him and 5 Americans, yeah.
Yeah, so I just think it's more of an indication of who was behind them. I mean, it just wasn't anything running on late at them. The one thing that was running on late with them happened to be a monster by the name of Arrogate. So I think it's more of an indication, at least in this scenario. Maybe it's different at a Wednesday at Aqueduct, but in this scenario, it's telling me that it's the horses behind them that were staying on, because essentially it's the horses you thought that were going to run well that stayed on, Neolithic. And Gunrunner are the horses that stayed on that were closer to the pace. So, I see where you're going with it, but in this situation, it's more who's behind.
Well, would you say then that Arrogate got a setup?
No, someone else said something like that. You can try to spin what happened to him as a setup, but there's nothing about what happened to him that was a setup, because, like I said, he was just better than them. And he had everything go against him, and he still was able to win. Now, I see what you're saying about that.
I'm not saying that. I'm kind of saying the opposite. I was saying I thought the track was kind to speed, negating the fact that just on pace figure alone, maybe you could argue there was a setup aspect. My own feeling is probably more that the track was kind to speed, negating any potential setup. But if you don't feel like the track was kind to speed, then I thought maybe you think that he did get a setup. That's where I was coming from.
That makes sense.
The other thing I'll note is I sometimes look at who those horses are that held on. If they are horses that are legitimate, I mean, we're talking about Gunrunner and Neolithic, those are legitimate speed horses. If we're talking about someone that got on a lead that just benefited and maybe wasn't as quality or hadn't shown that they're a quality racehorse, then I'm going to look at it a little bit differently.
I'll quote from Craig's email to me, because he said it much better than I can. He says, "I find it amazing that Arrogate not only won, he ran down Gunrunner, a horse that wasn't really quitting based on the pace figures. He, meaning Gunrunner, slowed a little, but Arrogate had to really motor to catch him. It wasn't an illusion in this case." And that's exactly where I stand. I just wanted to talk it through with you boys a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the form of the race. Jonathan talked about the horses who were in behind. Does the form of this race, the horses who were in behind, indicate how you view this race either on its face, Mike, or in a historical context?
Well, I'll start with on its face first, because that's an easier one. I mean, I think we'll see. Like I said, I feel like Gunrunner and Neolithic are legitimate dirt horses, legitimate older horses. I would expect them to win some races this year that Arrogate is not running in. So I think that they're good. We'll see how that plays out. And certainly from a historical perspective, I saw some nitwits on Twitter trying to say, "Oh,
you're always so nice to the people on Twitter, and now you call them nitwits. What's up with that?"
The people. I'll just say this: the people
You'll have
that
a
are
12-tweet exchange when after tweet 2 I would have hit mute and other nitwits.
The people that are saying that, look, he beat Neolithic, who's not a graded stakes winner. If you're trying to downgrade the race at this point, a lightly raced horse who's shown some talent and run well in big races, who is just a new 4-year-old and is probably going to go forward to win some good races. Wait a little bit until we judge the quality of this race from a historical perspective. That's all I want to say.
That's good though. Though in a few minutes, Mike, I'm going to ask you to do just that. But you're probably right, Jonathan. Who's the second fastest dirt horse in the world?
I don't know who the second fastest is. I have to think about that. I don't want to just say something flippantly. I will say this. Gunrunner and Neolithic are going to win 3 grade 1s this year between the two of them. I don't know which ones they're going to be, but they're going to win 3. And they're 2 legit racehorses. I mean, I think one of them will win the Whitney. One of them will probably win the Woodward. And one of them will ship around and pick up some other pieces in other places. I mean, they're both nice horses, and Gunrunners prove that. So I think that the historical context of this race and who the field in which, we're going to look back and say, oh, this is who he beat. It's going to be one that I think that the connections of Arrogate can be proud of.
I probably should have said dirt route horse in the world there to clarify the question a little further, but you answered it perfectly. Let's talk for a bit about one of the reasons I don't think in a little bit we're going to get to the history, and to me, the who you're running against in a historical context doesn't matter nearly as much in a world where we have speed figures. So what speed figure did Arrogate get for this performance? I've seen 3 different guesstimations. The way that I translate Craig's figures, that 133 that he gave would probably be right around a Beyer 110. Beyer himself went with a 115. And I believe Paul Matisse, our friend, was sort of right in the middle of that. Is that right, JK?
I actually haven't looked. I think so. I can look, but I'm not sure. I'm not 100%.
Take a look. I thought I saw him say something somewhere about it. Yeah, I'll continue my point. You could look. I'm pretty sure it's going to be in that range. And you might say
118. Well, no, actually he didn't. It's not posted. Maybe whatever he tweeted. It's not on our.
Gotcha. It's not in the system yet. So
no.
And in any case, it's going to be. I mean, 118 would be high. I thought it was closer to Beyer, maybe between Beyer and my guesstimation of the translation of Craig's figure. So in any case, it's theoretically slower than the fastest races he's run. But you got to look at that start, and you got to look to me at the trouble. I mean, the being hit is more significant than just getting left, and you've got to look at the ground loss. Now, because of Trackus, we can see that the amount of meters he ran farther than the mile and a quarter, which were, I think, the equivalent Craig mentioned of 93 feet. So that is, by my reckoning, 9 links compared to a speed rail trip that he might have gotten. So when you take, I don't know, I'm not saying it doesn't really work like you take all the bad links at the start and you add for this trouble and you add for ground loss and come up with a mega figure. That's not how I look at the world. If you did all that, you would have a number that was completely off the charts. But I think it's safe to say that this was when you factor in those other elements of the race, you're looking at a race probably better. I think you can confidently say better than anything he ever ran before. Does that sound crazy to you, Mike Hogan, or are you down with that?
No, or at least as good, yeah, because I've seen some people saying, oh, look, the downward trend of his Beyers, 122. Yeah, that's silly. I mean, it's really silly.
You watch the races? You got to watch races. You can't just look at the final time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's like, come on. If you're trying to find a reason to say he's vulnerable going forward, maybe you hang your hat on that, but I don't see it at all. I am with you, Pete. It's at least as good as his Travers, which from a Beyer standpoint is the highest he's earned in any of his previous races. And is from an impressive standpoint, just from a visual standpoint, it was as impressive a race I've seen from any racehorse in I mean, I'm just racking my brain to go back, maybe at Fleet Alex's Preakness, and just where you have legitimate trouble and you have a horse that's just, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
That gets to my second hot take, and I said this at the time to be, if you're going to bother to give a hot take, the part of the point of it is to say something that's a little out there, and I said in the immediate aftermath of the race that it might be the best, and this is a good way we can tip to the historical perspective, Jonathan. I said that it might be the best race I've seen since 1973. Blasphemy, or is there anything there?
I was 12 years. I was minus 12 years old at that point. So.
You've seen the race I'm talking about. Trust me.
No, I mean, here's the thing: is the way that he did it was what was so impressive. He was not all out to win that race.
That's another good point I didn't even make.
I mean, look, I think there's a difference between a shoulder tap and a full out whip crack. I don't think he even got a shoulder tap. If he did, it's because Mike had to stick to the inside and I didn't see it. I mean, he was just using the reins, and that's phenomenal. Considering the horse went 93 feet further than everyone else, missed the break by 4 lengths. I mean, shipped halfway across the world. He's a lightly raced 4-year-old. I mean, that was pretty special.
Jonathan demurred on the point that I was trying to get across there, Mike Hogan. Will you take it on a little more on the nose?
Well, and we'll talk about this in terms of his place in history. I'm okay and comfortable talking about some of the greatest performances in history or some of the greatest races in history. And I think that this is absolutely right up there with some of the best performances that you want to talk about. I'm happy to say that. I am a little less inclined yet to say he's one of the top 5 greatest race horses or one of the greatest racehorse ever. It's a little too early. There's time for that.
I don't know about ever, now. But I think it's indubitable. He's one of the 5 greatest of my lifetime. I mean, indubitable. Sure. No?
Perhaps, yeah. In our lifetimes, I think, Pete, you're within a year of me. We're both early to mid.
All the great horses of the 70s on to today.
Yeah. Right. So that doesn't include the Man of Wars. That doesn't include the Citations and the Kels. Yeah, right. And look, it's fine. I know people like to argue it. I know it's fun to discuss it. But I'm happy enough to just sit here and look at greatness. And when you see greatness, just feel lucky that you're seeing a great performance, a great horse, without having to try to get it down to, but does he fit in front of this one or behind this one?
I don't enjoy those kind of academic arguments. I far prefer the ones that you can bet on. I do indulge in this type of thing because we have a podcast, and this is the type of stuff that podcasts are made of. There's plenty of time on the show for us to talk about things that are going to help you cash a bet. This conversation isn't one of them, but I think you can't have a podcast and not at least talk about it. JK, I'm going to narrow the window for you now and ask you in a much more point-blank way. You've been following for considerably, well, you're just younger than us, but in terms of the last 10, 15 years, where does this horse rate for you?
I mean, he's to this point, he's the best I've seen that has actually run on the racetrack. Now, I've had this conversation many a times before. If you look at what Frosted turned into as a 4-year-old, and you expect a similar improvement of what American Pharoah would have turned into, I think that I would have liked to seen a race between the two of them, with their styles being so differently. American Pharoah was so much faster in terms of early speed and cruising on the front end. Not that Arrogate can't do that, but it'd be a great race to see happen. I think that if I was betting, I would bet on Arrogate at this point. Yeah. But the part about it that's annoying to me is because it's 2 Baffert horses, is people want to compare those two. And let's be honest. I mean, yes, Arrogate has done things that American Pharoah has not. But American Pharoah did something that Arrogate didn't do either. Arrogate didn't even get out of the barn.
Never could have done. If they had pushed Arrogate, and this is an important lesson in racing, if they'd pushed Arrogate, as many talented horses have been put through the meat grinder to Triple Crown or bust, we never would have heard of it. I mean, that's a very important thing to note. And American Pharaoh is still the one that was able to do the 3 races in 5 weeks, something that no other horse that you'll talk about when you're talking about Arrogate was able to do. And I guess that's the thing in racing, the accomplishments. There's so many different types of accomplishments you can have. It doesn't lend itself to these type of apples to apples conversations, which is why I like that we're talking about it in a more general way, right, JK?
Yeah, but here's also what's annoying to me, right? Is like if we're gonna play what ifs, well, what if American Pharaoh was gun runner and Arrogate missed the break by 4 lengths, and American Pharaoh was now a 4-year-old, a mature 4-year-old? I'm not 100% sure he would have caught him.
Yeah, I mean, it seems. I mean, you'll never know, right? Because, I mean, one of the things that's interesting about Pharaoh's career when you look at it is, and one of the things, and I don't really get this, but a lot of smart horse players seem to hold against a horse who never had trouble, when there is a fact that there are a subset of horses, and American Pharaoh's in this group, that don't have trouble because they make their own luck. So I can't hold that against a horse, but it does make it easier for our monkey brains to heap praise on horses like Arrogate, who have, when you see that trouble, you like react to it. I don't mean that like an insulting way. I just mean you see that trouble and you react almost like, I mean, I reacted almost emotionally, you know, like hair standing up. I mean, granted, I was pretty psyched watching Pharaoh. I had win the Belmont or win the Classic. But when you see a horse do that in the context of having that kind of trouble, there's just something about it that, like, the narrative of it just makes you go holy heck in a whole other way, and kind of makes your head explode a little bit differently. And I think that romance definitely adds to his appeal. Mike Hogan, you were tweeting some stuff. I gently trolled you about it, about this type of question. Why don't you let's talk about that for a minute.
Well, you know, I mean, I think people love it. I talked about his place in history a little bit. People love to make statements, and we see it now a lot on Twitter. And there have been some notable people, Richard Migliori among them, saying he's the greatest horse I've seen. You know, that Richard Migliori has seen a lot of really, really good racehorses in his time and ridden many of them. So that's not light praise coming from someone like him. Like I said, I'm more of the let's let time take its, you know, let's let some time sink in before we make any of those statements. But what I wanted to do, and I think that there are some people, I just took a guess and put out a poll and said, okay, here's the question. Greatest horse or not of all time, is he even the greatest horse that Juddmonte has ever owned? And I said, yes. And then I said, well, but Frankel. And it got a lot of response, because there are some people that are very, very, very strong Frankel fans. And Frankel actually got 55% of the votes, over 700 votes. I was surprised both in terms of recency bias and in terms of, I figured most of my followers skewed much more toward American racing. I was surprised to see the outcome like that.
I don't know, Mike. You're huge in the UK. You've got to keep that. You got to keep that in consideration. The thing about Frankel, it's hard to argue. It's hard to argue against perfection, right? But sure. even with Frankel, I mean, how could you possibly crab Frankel? I guess. I mean, I don't even know. It's something I'm curious to talk to Simon Rowlands about, of X of Time Form. Still writes for them occasionally. Want to have him a quick little guest spot on the show to talk about the historical perspective of these two. But I mean, yeah, to me, and my joke poll back was, what's the better fruit, apple or orange? I just feel like this one in particular resists any easy comparison. JK, you saw both these horses run. Is there any way, just let's do this academically, how would you even begin to have the conversation of Frankel versus Arrogate?
I don't know. I think it's hard because, like you said, it's apple and oranges, right? It's a turf horse in Europe versus a dirt horse in America. And it's
and the conversation might end there.
It's just so many different things. I mean, I wanted to make an analogy, and I felt like it was too strong, but it's like comparing the '85 Bears to the 2016 Golden State Warriors. That's the worst comparison ever. I should have thought of a better team. The 95 Bulls or 94 Bulls or whatever, the Bulls that were really good that broke the record. It's just two different situations. You're comparing a team sport, but it's just different.
Well, let me jump in and say this. My point of the poll was less to make you choose and more to say, look, let's not get too premature about anointing Arrogate as the greatest horse who ever stepped on a racetrack, because there are still some people who think he's not even the greatest horse that the owners ever owned. So,
but to that point, though, I guess when I said it after the race, I looked at people and I said, I'm not 100% sure I want to say it yet. I have a lot of adrenaline in my body. I've also had 2 mimosas. I think he might be the greatest horse I've ever seen.
Sure.
And when I say that he might be the greatest horse I've ever seen, I guess in my own little world of not being that specific, what I mean is in American racing, in my home, my sphere. I don't consider Frankel my sphere. Like I feel like he's like I'm admiring him from a distance because I don't know enough about that racing to really admire what he did. And so it'd be like unfair for me to like call him the greatest racehorse ever because I don't have any real context to say that. So yes. I guess when I say it, I think a lot of people, when they say it, they're comparing it to American Pharoah, Secretariat, John Henry, Easy Goer, those horses.
Let's not leave out, interesting you said Easy Goer when he was Sunday Silence's personal whipping boy, so it makes it hard to put him above that rival anyway. And I love Easy Goer, don't get me wrong. I just upset a whole lot of old school East Coast horse players. But we got to admit it. He was ours. You know what I mean? Like, I love the Mets, but it doesn't mean that there's not some other team that's better. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. The horse that hasn't been mentioned in this conversation, and I think folks interested in evaluating this horse from a historical perspective should check out the PPs because I think it's a really interesting conversation. Ghost Zapper.
Sure.
Either of you guys super familiar? Have you looked at Ghost Zapper's PPs recently?
I did. I have looked. How do you
compare and contrast the two horses?
Well, first of all, like I said, my context of when Ghost Zapper was running, I didn't know what was happening. I was at Lone Star Park in my hometown of Dallas when he won the Breeders' Cup Classic at Lone Star. I had no idea what I was seeing. I had no clue what was happening. So I think the context of it changes. But here's what I will say is that, you look at Ghost Zapper's PPs and it's pretty stinking impressive. The speed figures that he won at so many different distances is just I think probably the poster child for versatility in a horse. And he did it impressively. And he did it, as a 3-year-old and 4-year-old and one race as a 5-year-old in the Met Mile. But, I can get the argument if someone wanted to sit down and have the debate about who was better. But like I said, I would stick with Arrogate in that situation because of what he's done in such a little amount of time. I think is one of the things that's the most attractive about kind of his resume to this point.
I'll tell you this, and this is going to upset the Ghost Zapper fans out there, and they're legion, especially figure-oriented players. 1.25 miles on the dirt, Arrogate drills him, no doubt in my mind. Mike Hogan, any take on this?
I think I talked a little earlier about greatest performances in history and then greatest horses in history. They don't necessarily connect. I mean, maybe, obviously, they would, but it's not like Ghost Zapper was perfect. Ghost Zapper, certainly sprinting and earlier in his career, was not the horse that Ghost Zapper became later on.
Well, he was kind of awesome always. I mean, that King's Bishop was a trip for the ages if you watch that tape. But
yeah, but that was his 5th career start. What I'm saying is, Arrogate turned into Arrogate incredibly quickly. A year ago at this time, when we were talking about the Dubai World Cup, none of us had even heard of Arrogate because he hadn't even debuted yet. The only people that had heard of Arrogate were in the Baffert barn or in the Juddmonte operation. And that is an incredible performance. I tweeted out prior to the race, the PPs, and said, just think, this is a horse who a year ago had never even raced, and he's now poised to become the richest thoroughbred in North American history. Think about that for a second. And a lot of a lot of people were like, oh, it's a change in times. There's 2 points that I was trying to make. One was, yes, there are now races like the Dubai World Cup and the Pegasus and the Breeders' Cup, where if you run the table, it allows your earnings to just be ballooned. So he came in at a certain specific time, but even more impressive. And the point, that was the point people kind of glommed onto. The more impressive point for me was just how quickly he became who he became.
It is impressive. It is one of the impressive aspects of him for sure. This sort of, Roy Hobbs-like arrival on the scene. One little point of trivia pursuant to this conversation before we get to an excellent question that came over the transom from our friend Matt Bernier. But Arrogate, and I sort of vaguely knew this, but wasn't really sure. It's a word. It's a verb. I thought I knew it from Shakespeare, but then I didn't. That turned out to be Harrogate, something completely different. But it's sort of funny. Arrogate, it means, pursuant to this conversation about his place in history, to take or claim something without justification. They arrogate themselves the ability to divine the nation's true interest, that type of thing. I just thought that was just sort of a funny irony about a horse who is instantly, and I think fairly, by myself included, being compared with Secretariat and all the rest. To think about what his name means is just sort of a funny shadow on the conversation. Matt's question was, does one horse change the reputation of a sire? Unbridled Song has the earned reputation of passing on the brittle bodies. Now he's sired an all-timer. Do we think that changes his reputation long term as a sire? JK, what do you think?
No, I mean, I think what it's probably going to do is make Arrogate worth a hell of a lot of money, because I think they'll get all the benefits of an Unbridled Song, but with the soundness that Arrogate carries. So, congratulations to whoever has that insurance policy.
What do you think on that one, Mike? You know the breeding business better than JK or I do.
I think to some extent it kind of does. And I think one of the keys with Arrogate and with Unbridled Song is that they did wait, that we didn't see them on the Derby Trail. A lot of these quote unquote brittled, unbridled songs that we think of are these brilliant 2-year-olds or brilliant early 3-year-olds that don't hold up to the rigors of racing at the top level. I think the fact that we didn't see him until the second half of his 3-year-old year make his stakes debut, that might have a lot to do with why he's continuing on as a 4-year-old, why we're seeing the true greatness from him. And I wonder if, for whatever reason, he had been able to debut at 2 and was on the Triple Crown trail, if we might not be talking about this in the same way.
One other point I wanted to make before we get to this Marcus interview, which I'm really looking forward to. So I'm stealing this from somebody on Twitter. I've done this in the past, and if I'm stealing your tweet, let me know. I'll give you props next time. But pointed out the idea of Arrogate completing this 3, not unlike the Triple Crown, 3-race series, BC Classic, Pegasus, Dubai, and talked about the challenge of doing that and how impressive it was. And for me, it just made me smile thinking, geez, with the money available in those races, if this gives people a goal, I think too often in our sport, and I referred to it before about what would have happened to Arrogate if he'd been pushed to go in those Triple Crown races, which mercifully Bob Baffert and did not do. If instead to have this as a goal, like a longer term goal for some of these slower developing horses, how great could that be for the sport? Now, I know it's going to be hard to get the kind of mainstream interest in that 3-race series as the embedded in our culture Triple Crown. But Jonathan, do you think there's anything here that could be to the great benefit of horses themselves and horsemen and racing fans to have this alternative target to what I've described in the past as a glass ceiling sometimes for the sport of the Triple Crown?
Jonathan, speechless.
I didn't realize it was that kind of question.
We're there
before, but it's usually not over something like that. What do you think, JK?
Well, I mean, I would think that the Pegasus, not to kind of dodge your question, I think the Pegasus is probably the big race in that equation, because they specifically put it where a horse could still go to stud that season. So that's why I think if they would have had that race back when American Pharoah was running, there's a great possibility he would have stuck around for one more race. And so I think that is something that would kind of keep people in racing, give them a kind of a longer term goal if they have a horse that has some stud value. I still worry about, Dubai because, you got to get on a plane and go halfway across the world and the Dubai bounce and blah, 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 blah. And so,
Dubai bounce may or may not actually exist, but that's probably a topic for a future show. JK, I hate to cut you off, but I want to get to Marcus, and I don't want to go over time today, so we'll pick this up. There's plenty of time to talk about these matters and others like them. Here's Mike's interview with Marcus.
All right, now it's my pleasure to bring on Marcus Hersh, DRF correspondent, now back in the state of Illinois after a long trip through customs, through quarantine, from Dubai. Welcome, Marcus.
Hi, Mike. Glad to be back.
I saw on Twitter it was a little eventful for you, but I'm glad you're back. You sound remarkably awake for this time of the morning after having traveled halfway across the world. But welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. It was relatively uneventful. I did it to myself. The direct flight is too long for me in the economy class. And so I break it up, but I ended up having to make 2 stops. And when you get back and you're in Minneapolis and you're almost home and you got to wait 3 hours, that gets a little frustrating.
I can only imagine. Well, I know your time is limited, so let's get right to it. I know the big story, of course, was Dubai World Cup over the weekend. Arrogate, amazing performance from him. You were there in person. Let's just get your thoughts overall on the whole day in general before we talk a little bit about Arrogate.
Well, I mean, the whole week was a little odd in that it rained several times, and it rained quite a bit on Saturday morning after it had rained Friday. And the main track is it's not designed to drain really well, so it kind of holds water. And for me, it was a little bit of drama because I thought if they'd gotten one more big rainstorm in mid-afternoon, which was forecast as possible, I thought it could have put into play the possibility of a postponement because obviously you can't take any chances with a card like that. But they got the track relatively dried out. I thought it was sometimes, you end the day and you're like, well, they gave away a lot of money and there were horses here, but, that wasn't that satisfying and weren't that many great performances. But I thought it was one of the better World Cups in recent history, even before the last race. And then to have that horse run like he did, I just thought it was a tremendous night. It was pretty much everything you could have hoped for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody there and everybody watching across the world expected Arrogate to win. I don't think any of us expected him to win that way after that start. I thought, oh boy, this is going to be really, really tough for him. What were you thinking while you were there watching the race in person?
Well, I was covering all the other races, but I just said, screw it, I'm putting all the other work aside. I'll catch up later. I went into the walking ring, or where the saddling enclosure, where this giant area where they put the saddle on, and I watched him get saddled and warmed up. And I walked through the tunnel right next to him and into the parade ring and kind of just tried to focus on that experience. And I got a spot where I was right next to the racing surfaces. The turf course is outside the dirt, so the dirt some distance from the edge of the apron. But anyway, I was right as far forward as I could be, so I could see the home stretch and the start and the giant video board too. And at the start of the race, the anticipation was really intensely. The excitement was palpable in the air, and then. You couldn't see exactly what happened. You had to watch the replay to see exactly how his trouble began. But when you see the horse where he was right after the start, my first thought was, okay, it's over. I thought, well, you've come all this way, and then this horse looks like he's so formidable. And there's, we see it all the time in racing. Just when you start to think that a horse is invincible and is kind of a cinch is when you get a reality check that is horse racing, and so many things can go wrong. And they're animals who are susceptible to all the sorts of variabilities of travel and fatigue and just maybe, not being interested on the night or having whatever. And I thought into the first turn I thought that there was no way the horse could win. It just was, I can't really can't overstate what I mean, and I'm pretty jaded, and to me, like, the bar is high to call things great performances, but I can't really overstate what I think the horse did, and I don't really want to hear this stuff about, like, oh, was he just beat Gunrunner and Neolithic. I mean, first of all, he beat Neolithic by 7 lengths. But to be in that position, I mean, that was even onto the head of the backstretch, I think he was pretty much in an impossible spot. First of all, he was like 7 wide on the backstretch, but then I realized that the jockey was just keeping him out of the kickback. But he made, how many moves did he make? I mean, he made a little move on the first turn to get into some sort of manageable spot near the back, and then when he dropped him in before the turn, he made another move there to get some more position around the turn, and then he made another move halfway around the turn to really get into position, and then after he came to the stretch, and I mean, it's a little remarked upon, but he got really solidly bumped twice by Moved Highish, who was drifting out. He just ran right through that, and then he made his final move, and he wasn't even cropped to win going away by 2.5 lengths over a horse who won the Grade 1 Clark over Shaman Goes, who has since come back to be second in the Pegasus and win the Santa Anita handicap. And he was crushing him. If the race would have been 1.5 miles, he would have won by 10 lengths. And I just would like people to kind of imagine, what if the horse breaks on cue, and gets into a kind of a good, comfortable stalking spot? What does he do in that race? I mean, I think he could have won by double digit lengths easily, and really turned in just a brilliantly fast performance too.
Absolutely, and you obviously watch a lot of Dubai racing, certainly much more than I do. But my understanding is the way that track plays, it doesn't really play to that type of last to first closing run.
You never see it.
Yeah, at least as far as the way the race shaped out, it's not like anyone else was moving at all from the back of the pack. So it wasn't as though the pace really set up for that kind of run. The track doesn't play to that kind of run, which makes it even more remarkable. I mean, this isn't like, Oaklawn, where the 1, 2, 3 finisher or starters were, last, second to last, and third to last at the end of the race. He was moving against the race flow. He was moving against that track profile. It's just in that start where he just got hammered from both sides. It was incredible.
Well, I will say on the night, the wet surface, and they've not had any race cards there over a track that wet this year. And it was not the typical Maidan dirt profile on the night. I would say that it was much different than usual. And even beyond that, on a card-to-card basis, as far as the front-running sort of tendencies, and you still have a lot of horses that are not truly dirt horses trying to run into kickback, and they just can't do it. But on the night, it was not. If it was fair or favoring horses maybe a little off the rail and coming from behind, because the track does drain pretty significantly down to the inside. The rail might not have been great, but absolutely, as far as the race shape, if you take a look at the chart, the horses near the front occupied all the positions right in behind the winner. So it wasn't a situation where you've got a horse that's way at the back and just benefits from a pace where it enervates everyone else near the lead by the top of the stretch. It wasn't that at all. I thought Gunrunner ran really well. I mean, that horse, I think, has just really improved significantly since around the early last fall. Like, his Breeders' Cup Miles, I think he's way better than he was then. And even I think people might underrate his Razorback because they don't know the horse Hawakam, who was second. That's a solid horse, and I'm definitely going to be picking him to win the Grade 2 New Orleans handicap, whether he does or not. But he just destroyed that horse. And he's really learned to race, I think, this Gunrunner. He relaxed beautifully. And Florent Giroux I thought he rode him spectacularly. He waited so long. I mean, look at the Godolphin Mile, the first race of the day, the ride on Sharp Azteca with a jockey who, and I'm not trying to call him out, but he'd never ridden at the track, and he moved way, way too early, not knowing really how long the stretch was and how that track was configured. But Giroux waited until he was all the way straightened home to ask the horse for anything. He did a great job, and that horse, I feel like the horse is maybe underrated a little bit right now, which is, I feel like Gunrunner is probably the second best third horse in the world, and Arrogate, treated him like a rag doll.
Yeah, well, and I'm inclined to agree with you, which to my mind makes it even more unfortunate, the quarantine situation that they had down at Fairgrounds, because not to say he would have necessarily beaten Arrogate in the Pegasus World Cup, but it's a shame that he wasn't able to run.
Well, right. The 1.1 miles with a short stretch certainly would give him a better chance than 1.25 miles with a long stretch, right?
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about some of the other races that you saw on Saturday. I'll let you pick your spot. What was the second most impressive performance on the day?
Well, I mean, the two $6 million turf races are the most important races, and I thought Jack Hobbs really stepped forward nicely in the Shima Classic. I mean, that horse was not fully exposed because he was injured so much of last year, and he really ran well. I mean, that was a race where in Highland Reel ran last. He was obviously far below his form, and Postponed, who was the best 1.5 mile horse in Europe early last year. I'm just not sure he's ever really going to reach those heights again. And Seventh Heaven, who came for the Breeders' Cup but was going too short in the 1.25 mile affiliate mare turf, she doesn't really like soft ground either. And credit to her for running second. She could be a force through the year. And both of those horses, Jack Hobbs and Seventh Heaven, those are horses that we could consider maybe getting to see in the Breeders' Cup turf, I think, this fall. So yeah, Jack Hobbs was impressive. I think the Dubai turf was not really definitive in any sense at all. The Mind Your Biscuits was huge. I thought he just ran a tremendous race. He ran close to 7 furlongs in that 6 furlong race. He was so wide, and he just dominated those horses. Now, that's a race where if you want to look back to second and say, well, Kamikaze and Morowitz, those are really not like grade 1 dirt sprinters. But, quietly, the U.S. dirt sprint division has completely fallen apart the last couple of years. And Mind Your Biscuit's going to be a major player in one-turn races all year if he can hold his form. I thought he ran really well.
Absolutely. We only have a couple more minutes, and then we'll let you go. Let's look ahead to this weekend. I know you're going to be down in Louisiana at Fairgrounds for the Louisiana Derby. I know you've probably not had the time to do the full handicapping deep dive, but what do you expect from that race? And is there any horse in there that you're particularly interested in playing?
Well, I mean, my first pass through it, just shockingly a weak race for $1 million. I mean,
yeah,
the 3-year-old division is starting to look very thin, and the races are coming up soft. It's one of the softer. I thought the Risen Star looked better top to bottom than Louisiana Derby, sadly. Gervin, we got to see if he can repeat his performance in the Risen Star. I'm not saying he can't, but I'm not totally convinced that, he's that horse yet. I want to see him move forward. I would have to think that Guest-Sweet, who was 4th in the Risen Star, has a great chance to improve. And I think Local Hero, who was 3rd in the Risen Star, can have a great chance to improve. He was just too keen early in his last race, and now they've had a chance to work with him for a while now. And I expect him to be more relaxed. And he's the sort of front-running galloper who's bred to go a real distance. He might like 1 mile and an 8. But as far as like the minor players, I mean, you got Pletcher sending 2 horses. One of them, Patch, looks like he's the one with some upside. And the way his season is going with his shipper is just doing so well. I mean, you have to take that horse really seriously. But I don't see a lot of depth in the race. I think to me it's going to be the chief story is it's a referendum on Gervin and his legitimacy as a Derby horse.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Marcus. Always a pleasure to have you on the DRF Players podcast, and we hope to have you back again soon.
The pleasure was mine, and thanks for having me, Mike.
There you have it from Marcus Hersh, who will be back on the show soon. Always great to hear from him, and a terrific take on the goings of Dubai World Cup night and some terrific insights in there. Thanks for doing that, Mike. We have about, a minute left on the show. If anybody has a quick closing thought, or else we can think about wrapping up here.
I don't know. I have a lot. I don't think I can wrap it up in a minute. So we'll hold it for
we'll
Friday.
leave you on the sidelines. JK, how about you?
No, I'm good to go. We'll see you guys on Friday.
In that case, I want to thank Jonathon Kinchen. I want to thank Mike Hogan. I want to thank Marcus Hersh, our special guest for today. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening. We'll be back on Friday with a look ahead. We've got some 3-year-old prep races to talk about. We'll recap a little bit more about the 3-year-old goings-on from the past weekend. Not a whole heck of a lot to say there, so we'll just move that. We have some good questions that came in we didn't have time for. We'll try to get to those. If you have questions for us, hit us up on Twitter or podcast@drf.com. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.